and welcome. On behalf of the National Catholic Educational Association, thank you for joining us for this professional learning opportunity. My name is Laura MacDonald, and I'm the Vice President of Content and Program Development here at NCEA, and I get to be the moderator for today's webinar, Psalms, Rubrics, Repertory, and Rehearsals for Children's Choirs and Liturgy. I'm glad I got through that because that was a tongue twister. I had to say it slowly. This is the second webinar in a three-part music series. A bit of housekeeping before we begin. First, this session is being recorded if you didn't see that already, and will be available soon on ncea.org. But you can also access the first session in this series on the website now. Next, kindly note that the chat is disabled, but we do have the Q&A box open. And so that Q&A box is there for you to use to submit questions, make comments, and we encourage you to do so. And questions will be answered at the end. And then finally, stay with us until the end, because after the presentation, I will share a survey link for you to submit, as well as an opportunity for you to receive a certificate of completion for this session. So let's begin our time together in prayer. I have a prayer for teacher appreciation, because for some of our schools will be celebrating that within the next week or so, it's always a good time to appreciate a teacher. So in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Jesus, divine teacher, you have blessed us with many wonderful people in our lives. Today, we thank you for our teachers. We thank you not only for what they teach, but more importantly, how they teach. We thank you for their care, concern, guidance, and love, for their academic contributions and extracurricular contributions, in appreciation for all they do for us and how they affect our lives. We thank you for the gift they give our students. We ask you, Jesus, to bless our teachers. May they know that their example of faith and concern has tremendous impact on our lives. Grant them peace and strength now and always. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. At this time, it is my privilege to introduce today's speaker, Laura Kempa Bogan. Ms. Bogan currently leads the choral program at St. Francis of Assisi Parish in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Her role includes directing the children's choir and youth cantor program at the parish school, where over 100 young singers serve at school and parish liturgies throughout the year. Ms. Bogan has also led the middle school choir in their travels locally and abroad to participate in festivals and events with other Catholic youth choirs. Ms. Bogan brings many years of experience as a cantor and choral singer to her teaching, singing with professional ensembles in the Detroit and Chicago areas. She delights in helping each student to discover their voice and gifts and to offer them for the glory of God. And I don't know about you, but I was one of those choir students all through school, and it was really, really important to me. So I'm really happy to be here with you. Welcome, Ms. Bogan.
Thank you, Laura. Welcome, everybody. I'm so happy to be here with you this afternoon. Today's webinar is presented in partnership with the American Federation of Pueri Cantores, and I just wanted to share a little bit about them and their work before we get to our content today. Pueri Cantores is the official student choral organization of the Catholic Church. There are 32 federations from around the world, and they comprise over 70,000 young singers. The purpose, the mission of the organization is for formation and catechesis for our young singers and a means for evangelization through music. Here on this slide, you see a photo of the festival that we hosted here in Michigan. Throughout the US, the American Federation organizes local choral festivals, and then there's also some that are organized on a more national and international level. We've attended some of the international events as well. About every 5 years, they have a gathering in Rome that has traditionally included an audience with the Holy Father and singing at the Papal Mass on New Year's Day. I've taken our kids locally. We've traveled regionally. We've gone to Rome. I started teaching and took 5 kids to a festival. And then this year, we're the group that's all in maroon there. That's 75 students. And in every situation, the chance to make music together, to rehearse in an in-depth way, and to sing in these beautiful spaces and make new connections and deepen our faith they've just been a highlight for all of our singers and their families. So I know they're busy working on next year's festival schedule, and I would encourage you to check that out and to make that a part of your planning for next year. Today, we talk about the Psalms. So we'll look at them through the 3 R's of the tongue twister title. Rubrics, what is a psalm? How are the Psalms a part of our liturgy? And what guidance does the church give us about the Psalms in the liturgy? Then we'll talk a little bit about rehearsal. How do we help our singers to build skills to proclaim the Psalms in the liturgy? And then we'll close by looking at different repertoire. What options are there, and how do we choose repertoire that is appropriate for the liturgy and the needs of our developing singers? We'll save time for questions at the end. Sometimes I'll mention something earlier on, and then we'll circle back to it later. So do make a note, and we'll come back to those things at the end of the presentation. In the USCCB introduction, in their edition of the Bible on their website, they write, the Psalms are a school of prayer. They not only provide us with models to follow, but inspire us to voice our own deepest feelings and aspirations. And I love this image of them being a school of prayer and how that informs the time that we spend with them, both in our own liturgical preparation and in the way that we help our students to prepare. A few facts about how the Psalms are put together. They are, of course, the Old Testament. They were originally written in Hebrew, so a Hebrew text. They were composed for sung liturgical worship, so the rhythm of the Hebrew would have been sung. My colleague pointed out the other day that Jesus would have prayed and sung these Psalms, which I hadn't really thought about, but I thought was just a really sort of spectacular thing to realize. There's also directions within the Psalms that indicate that they were used in liturgy. So some at various points you'll read or hear something like, and all the people say, let us praise the Lord. Let all the ministers say, and sort of there's liturgical direction in there, and that's part of how we understand that. The Psalms are a collection of poetry. They're often divided into 5 books. Each book ends with a doxology. For our purposes, in thinking about preparation for the liturgy and how to musically express them, I think it's interesting to consider them as categories of different types. So there are songs of praise, there are songs praising Zion, God's dwelling place. There are songs of thanksgiving. There are songs of lament. Interestingly, there are the most songs of lament. And then other content kinds of psalms. These might fall under one of the other categories, but there are some that are around praising the king or the royalty, psalms praising wisdom or praise of the law. When we think of poetry in our contemporary way, we might think of Shakespeare or other kind of metered and rhymed verse in terms of the techniques that the author is using. The Psalms don't have that. There's a sort of rhythm that's inherent to the Hebrew, but they don't rhyme and they don't have the same number of syllables. That becomes an important part of the conversation about how do we set them to music and how do we sing them well. The other thing that I think is interesting to keep in mind about the structure of the poetry is that they employ this idea of kind of parallel repetition. So one of Psalm 135 begins, praise the name of the Lord, praise you servants of the Lord. So there's a parallel structure and an echoing of something that is the same but slightly different. And we sing that a lot. And I think that, again, kind of has implications for how we treat the text. There is a kind of rhythm that we find that some scholars have used in some of the English translations of the text, and we call this element sprung rhythm. It's the idea that there's the same number of accented syllables in a line, or kind of a meter of accented syllables, but different numbers of unaccented syllables in between, hence the name sprung. If you think of like skipping versus walking metrically, kind of a thing. So this is an example from Psalm 27. So I've underlined and bolded the stressed syllable so that we can count together. We have the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom should I fear? So 3 and then 2. We see the same meter in the next phrase. The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Whom should I dread? You'll notice, though, that, for example, at the end of the first line, there's the rest of the word salvation. At the end of the stronghold of my life, that's ending on an accented syllable. There's nothing after it. So there's variety in the number of unaccented syllables within the line. The Psalms are woven throughout the liturgical life of the church. The one that I think we're all most familiar with and that we'll spend the most time talking about today in terms of rehearsal and performance practice is the responsorial psalm. This text comes from the lectionary. At Mass, there is also another place where we find psalms in the liturgy, and that is at the entrance, the offertory, and the communion antiphons. These are in the Roman Missal or the Graduale Romanum, and often the antiphon or the kind of the refrain it is related to the scriptures of the day in some way. But then there are psalm verses that are correspond to the meaning or the kind of mood of that antiphon in some way. These our technique for singing these will be the same as what we talk about for the responsorial psalm. So if you want to find ways to start using these antiphons or to have your students chanting parts of these antiphons, what we talk about today is certainly applicable there. Outside of Mass, the liturgical life of the church includes the divine office or the liturgy of the hours. And these are, of course, the several offices or hours that are timed throughout the day. Our priests and our religious pray them as a part of their ministry. Certainly in community life, like at a monastery or a religious order, oftentimes the order will gather to pray them together. And this is where we get sort of our image of monks chanting the Psalms together, and other orders as well, praying and chanting these liturgies together. The ones that are most common, I think, in our parish settings would be morning prayer, evening prayer, or night prayer. And we do a little bit here and there at our parish of singing them together. It's not quite as common, but again, all of the techniques that we talk about for teaching the students how to chant the psalm would be applicable if you want to start to integrate that into your prayer and life in your parish or your school. We'll shift our focus now to some of the details of the responsorial psalm. This is from the general instruction on the Roman Missal, which gives us guidance for sort of where to start in the particulars of how we exercise our ministry as liturgical musicians. After the first reading comes the responsorial psalm, an integral part of the liturgy of the word, and holds great liturgical and pastoral importance because it fosters meditation on the Word of God. And I think for me, this last phrase, fostering meditation on the Word of God, is something that I want to be at the front of my mind as I think about our repertoire and think about our work with our students and the sequence that we set up here. The responsorial psalm is part of the liturgy of the word taken from the lectionary, and it's a part of all masses. So whether it's a weekday mass or a Sunday mass, there's a responsorial psalm. There's a preference for it to be sung. Sometimes at a weekday mass, this isn't the case, but for example, in our school setting, when the students all go to mass together, we sing it. And it's important that there's a congregational refrain or response to the verses of the psalm. We said the text comes from the lectionary. It's particular to the day, which means that, especially for school masses, sometimes the psalms are a little bit obscure, or there might not be a musical setting of it that's available to us. So we do have the option for seasonal psalms. They're designated in the lectionary. And there's also some provision for approved metrical adaptations. So we talked about how the poetry of the Psalms doesn't really follow the regular kind of repetitive meter that a lot of our hymnody or other poetry might follow. That can make it challenging to set musically or challenging to sing. We're sort of trying to fit a text we're trying to fit a text that's unmetered into metered music. So sometimes there needs to be a little bit of adaptation to the text. The ones that are published in the hymnals, like from GIA or OCP, have all been approved by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, or there's provision for diocesan approval. I think an example of this that shows kind of a real difference in text would be something like "Shepherd Me, O God," which is the part of a lot of our parish repertoire. So the lectionary refrain would be, "The Lord is my shepherd, there is nothing I shall want," and sort of the paraphrase there. Um, when we're looking at these things, the reason that the instructions give the option for a seasonal psalm or other metrical adaptation is to offer additional ways of meditating on the text. So if you're in a situation that pastorally calls for that adjustment to best offer that opportunity for meditation, then those options are there. I think really we're moving, generally the resources now are setting the lectionary text verbatim, and we're really trying to find ways to sing that text and be faithful to that translation and to the kind of the rhythm of the Psalms as the kind of poetry that they are, not making them a different type of poetry. They may not be replaced with a different hymn or song. They're the psalm from the lectionary, the word of God, and that's important to note too. When we look at translations of the Psalms, or you could also title this slide, "Why Don't My Translations Match?" I have this book in my office that has one version of the text. I found this other book behind the organ. It has another version. Can I use them? What do I do with all this stuff? I think we could spend a lot of time talking about it. This is, I think, the concise story. When we moved to the English liturgy after the Second Vatican Council, several English language translations were approved for liturgical use for the Psalms. These included the Grail Psalm translations, which were translations that used elements of the sprung rhythm that we were talking about earlier. When the lectionary was revised in 1998 and then later implemented for use, if they would have printed all the different approved psalm translations, it would have been an extremely large book. So they printed the New American Bible Translation, and that's what's on the USCCB website. We continue our translation journey, and we shift in 2001 with Liturgicum Authenticum towards a more literal translation or movement towards that in our work. So in 2008, we have a publication of the revised Grail Psalm text. So this is that translation that uses those elements of sprung rhythm. We will come back to that in a bit here with some musical examples. This is included in what is now called the Abbey Psalms and Canticles. And going forward, whenever we have a new edition of an English liturgical text, these will be the translations that we use in those texts. If you go to the publisher website, GIA and OCP both have sort of a which translation are you shopping for today? Do you want the lectionary? Do you want the New Grail? Do you want the Abbey Psalms and Canticles? So it's all kind of divided based on what your parish is using, but all of them are approved for liturgical use. Here's an example, just a side-by-side of the New American Bible versus the Revised Grail. So you can see that they're very similar in content. The first two phrases are exactly the same. The third and fourth lines, "The Lord is my life's refuge," and then the Grail, "The Lord is the stronghold of my life." So that third line is adjusted so that it follows that same meter of number of stressed syllables. When we look at the responsorial psalm, there's a couple of terms to keep in mind as we go to talk about our rehearsal and then talk about repertoire. The first is the term antiphon. So this is also called like a congregational refrain. This is the sung response of the assembly to in the psalm. So in this example, it's at the very top. The Lord is my light and my salvation. So it's sung first by everyone, and then a cantor or choir will sing the text below, the verses, and then the assembly responds with the antiphon at the end of each verse. Our verses are most usually sung by a cantor. In our setting, we sometimes do teach them to the choir for a special occasion. In that case, I usually follow the same kind of procedures that I'll share with you in terms of teaching sequence. When we think about the style of the verses, there's three different options. We'll get into these in more detail when we look at repertoire, but the first would be metrical. That would be like Shepherd Me, O God. God is my shepherd. I'm following a regular metered four beats in a measure sort of pattern. This here example is chanting, and that's following the rhythm of speech. The Lord is my light and my salvation, or something around there. There's also an in-between version, which I call metered chant, and that makes more sense when you look at an example. So we'll take a look at that later. Next, I want to take a few minutes and talk about our rehearsal sequence and our pedagogical considerations. I think it helps to have a little bit of an idea of how we're going to try to teach what we're going to do, and then to kind of look at repertoire through that lens. So a little bit of context about our situation here at St. Francis. I have students from grades 3 through 8 in our choirs. Third, fourth, and fifth grade rehearse with me once a week during recess for half an hour, depending on how quickly they come in from outside. The middle school choir rehearses with us once a week after school for about an hour. We have Mass every Friday at our school. The student cantors sing for those liturgies, and then all of our special holy day and feast day liturgies. So usually there's an extra Mass or two a month, depending on the liturgical calendar. Our students begin cantoring as fifth graders. And when I start working with them as fifth graders, I've made arrangements with their teachers to pull them twice the week that they sing from class to do some rehearsal. So I meet with them in a group of 4 or 5. You can see some of our fifth graders preparing in this photo. And then we have about, I don't know, 2 20-minute rehearsals. And then I see them on the day of Mass. And so the time is pretty compressed, and it's their first time singing the psalm or gospel acclamation with a chanted verse. So I've worked to try to develop a routine with them that will start from what they know and build some incremental skills and give them some practice strategies. I think it helps them to know what to expect as well. They usually cantor 2 or 3 times throughout the course of the year. And those of you who work with this age will probably agree with me that fairness is a big thing. And so I've really tried to avoid things feeling like an audition for a part or feeling like I'm assigning things based on favorites. So a part of it feeling fair is to do it the same way every time. When we see our students every day, we don't want to do everything the same way every time. But in this case, I think it kind of levels the playing field in a way. And then it gives all of the students a chance to learn it, even if they're not the one who's singing it at Mass that particular week. Like many of you, this is a half-time position, and I have 3 young kids. So having the same setup for each one of these rehearsals that are kind of interspersed whenever I can find 20 minutes with their teacher, it helps me to know walking into that rehearsal, okay, this is our process and this is what we're going to do, and we're going to make the most out of the limited time that we have together. So what I'll walk you through today is what I do like the very first time that I pull them. As they proceed through the program, then we're able to skip steps and they gain more facility, and we don't have to quite take it with each one of these elements so strictly. But I found that this process has really built some very solid skills for our cantors. So the first thing that we always want to do as teachers is to look for elements of the familiar. Yeah. So the first thing that I do with them is to sing the antiphon together. That's that very top line. It's a metrical text. They've probably sung it at Mass at some point. And if not, it looks like their other choir music. It doesn't look like what is this stuff down here? I don't know how to read that. So we'll sing the antiphon together a couple of times. In this case, I always have to correct the text setting at the Lord is my light and my salvation. So addressing any of those things from there. The next thing that we do is to look at the verse. And what I have them do first is to proclaim the first verse of the psalm together, speaking. Some of them read at Mass, so that's a frame of reference for them. And we talk about kind of how it's a speech rhythm, but it's paced in a little different declamatory way. It also is, I think, a reminder to them of that this is not just any text, but that this text is scriptural and it is the word of God, and we treat it differently as such. As we read, it also gives me a chance to hear where they're going to stumble and to know that's a text problem, not a pitch problem. So we can practice saying long words like in the fourth verse, stout-hearted, not something we are talking about in the cafeteria. And then also gives them a chance to say, hey, Mrs. Bogan, what does this word mean? I've never heard that before. So we have time to look at the text together. I usually do this a verse at a time so that we keep things moving in terms of what we're doing. The next thing I do is to teach only the psalm tone. So they're used to echoing solfege patterns, but you could certainly go na 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 na, echo me, na 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 na, and sing through each line and have them echo. I really have loved using solfege as an application here. I just start most of my rehearsals with simple solfege echoes, so they're used to that already and used to doing the hand signs to accompany the singing. I think it's when you look at it, it's hard to trace all of the text initially. So if I say to them instead, ti, do, ti, la, and have them echo that with me, and then there's only 5 of them, so I can stand there and point at their score and sort of show them how it's moving. It's much more specific to have a syllable to apply. At times, especially once they get a little bit more familiar with this style of singing, I'll give them the first, or will identify the first solfege syllable of the line together, and then they'll write in the rest of the solfege. And it's a nice chance for me to assess if they understand the way that assigning the syllables work, and then a chance to kind of offer some extra support that I can't in our large group rehearsals. Our elementary choir has 75 students. We rehearse in small groups of 30, but still in our quick rehearsal time, there's not always time to really be able to support them in that way. So I found this is a nice opportunity to kind of revisit that. The other thing that I like about teaching the psalm tone is that we're teaching them a quick melody. Kids memorize things really quickly, way quicker than we do, right? And so then they're able to internalize that, and then they can really just focus on the text. And that's really, that we want to meditate on that text. So it helps point us there. So once I've taught the psalm tone, then I'll say something like, now I'm going to look at verse 1 and I'm going to sing the words as written, and I'd like you to trace that first line with me. So I'll ask them to take their finger and literally trace the words as I sing them. So I'll sing, the Lord is my light and my salvation. And then I'll say, let's sing that together. So we'll all do it together. The Lord is my light and my salvation. And then I'll say, I'll invite them to, I'll do the same process in the second line. So I'll sing the next line and ask them to sing it again with me. In our ideas about choral pedagogy and music pedagogy, music education pedagogy, Our goal is always for our singers to be independent and to sing on their own. Because this is a new style of singing and one that they're not going to sing really on Sunday. They'll hear it Sunday, maybe, but not in their music class, not really in choir either. We're singing other metrical pieces. I feel like I've found that the students will sing out more if they sing with me and they get a sense of of the way that you move through the line a little bit. So I sing with them initially, and then as we move further in the process, then I start to kind of slowly back out. Um, After we go through all of these, after we go through each one of these lines, um, then I'll have them sing the whole verse together with me. So we would sing through all of verse one. When we do that, if you look with me, the second line is, "Whom should I fear?" When you look down at the last line, we get, "Of whom should I be afraid?" So it starts the same way, but doesn't quite end the same way. I find that this is a spot where the students will make mistakes and need us to revisit. That's where the hand sign, the solfege hand signs can be helpful, or just some other gesture to help them, maybe in that second line, "Whom should I be?" Doing some gesture to show height or higher pitch, and then in the last line, a different gesture. That's been a really useful tool for our students as well. Once we've sung all the way through verse one together and feel really good about it together, then I have each of the students sing it by themselves at the microphone. So they get a chance to feel what it's like to proclaim a verse of the psalm at the microphone in the space. This prepares them for our liturgy, but if they don't get assigned to sing the psalm, then they're building that skill of singing the psalm. I used to worry a lot more about getting through all of the text, and as I've gone, I found that really kind of lingering in the first verse or two on our first day and really taking the time to learn the psalm tone and taking the time to learn what it feels like to sing it well then allows them to move through verse 3 and 4, whatever other verses, more quickly. It also gives them some skills to practice on their own. It's very sweet. I hear from parents who say, "My child came home Tuesday and she's been singing her psalm verse all week." But they gives them enough to go on to do a little bit from there. The other thing that I think is useful to consider in our conversation about rehearsal is teaching students how to mark a score together. So here I've marked in the solfege syllables that we would use. If you might use a different, this is for la-based do. If your syllables might look different, that's what I'm trying to say. Um, and I would not mark, I don't usually mark in the solfege syllables for the students. We would figure that out together as we went, but they're there for your reference. The other things that we consider are, where do we breathe? So if you look at the end of verse 4, there's a longer phrase there. "Be stout-hearted and wait for the Lord." For a young singer to get through that first word, that's a big word. We mark in that pause so that it reminds them to take a breath there, and then they have enough air to get through the rest of the phrase. The other thing that comes up is this kind of, where do I move? So when you have the first phrase, "The Lord is my light," and like that's a lot of text on one note. Then all of a sudden, in the second phrase, we just have two syllables. "Whom should I fear?" And often students will not move soon enough because they're used to that long reciting tone. So some sort of arrow or direction can help guide their eye. I'm always thinking about how can we mark this so that it'll point their eye in the right direction. Um, I didn't underline them here, but the other thing we sometimes discuss are what words are important. So if you look at the third line of verse 2, "that I may gaze on the loveliness of the Lord." That's a line where a beginning cantor would be kind of inclined to sing something like, "that I may gaze on the loveliness of," and we'd say, okay, well, we're getting all the text out. What do you think is important there? What word do you want to make sure we hear? Loveliness. So we could underline that and then practice maybe a gesture on that word to help us get through there. That I may gaze on the loveliness and just practice that much and then add in the rest of it. The other thing that I write there are there other surprises? Because there's always some verse that's different or skips a line or, does something. In this particular psalm, if you look at the first two lines, they're doubled up. So we sing, one thing I ask of the Lord, this I seek, then back to the beginning to dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life. That's hard. The beginning student, any of us really, are going to need to mark that. But especially if you're just learning how to navigate these scores, that's, I think, an important thing to mark. The next part of our conversation, I want to talk a little bit about different kinds of notation for both chanting and the other types of psalms, and then offer just a couple of considerations as you decide which type of psalm might be best for your singers. There's a lot of variation in the available styles of chant, so I'll share the ones that I have encountered the most in the resources that we've used, but there are certainly many different ways. And I think people are doing their best to develop different styles that are easy to read and accessible for us to read. The first one that I want to look at actually sort of takes a step back from our modern notation. This is a psalm tone with what we call a pointed text. So you see on the one side of the slide, Psalm 68, let God arise, let his foes be scattered, let those who hate him flee from his presence. So the text is written out, and then you see bolding or italics to indicate where you're going to move. Rather than those long tones that we were just looking at, you have what I've boxed in red on the other side, and we call that a psalm tone. So this tone is so la, do, ti, la. So the first line would sound like, let God arise, let his foes be scattered. Let those who hate him flee from his presence. So you're moving pitch with the change in style in the text. We could talk for a long time about how to point the text and the stress of the text and all of those things, but I think this is the essential information to know about this style. In the next line, you see this cross symbol, or it's called a flex. Sometimes you'll see an additional cadence pattern for that flex. In this resource, the Simple English Propers, and a lot of other English chant, that simply means to take a breath in the middle of that, in whatever long note, reciting note that you're in. This is not a responsorial psalm. This is from an option for the entrance antiphon from a resource called the Simple English Propers. I found that you find this style of pointed text much more frequently in the antiphons or in the divine office. And that's for practical reasons, really. There's many verses of psalms within those volumes, and there's simply not the space to set them in the more modern notation with the reciting tone. Most of our, I think, more contemporary psalm resources from the publishers are going to use the example that we were just looking at. You can do the same idea of a psalm tone with more modern notation. So this is a psalm that we put together for a weekday. I have the embarrassing luxury of having a colleague who's a composer and has written a full setting of the psalms for the liturgical year. And he cares deeply about the students singing the text of the day during the weekly mass. So he's been adapting them for our school masses so that we're able to do that. This is the first time in my life where I've been in that situation. So if you're not, there are certainly many other ways to sing the psalm with great integrity and good options. What's interesting about this is that you see the refrain across the top, and then the second line, we have a psalm tone. It's just written out. This is a longer tone. This would be more like that 4-line pattern that we looked at in the teaching example, the Lord is my light and my salvation. I used this with students several months ago and realized as I was going to meet with them that I had forgotten to point the text. And I thought, though, they know how to chant, they understand these patterns. Let's see how they do. So I did the same kind of teaching procedure that I described. We learned the antiphon, remember the marvels the Lord has done. I then taught them, we worked out the solfege syllables for the whole psalm tone. Since it was only written out this way, it was actually really helpful to assign a syllable to each one of the pitches and to sing through that. Then we read the first verse, which I've shown here, and then I sang a verse. When the Lord called down a famine on the land, and then they echoed, and we sort of went line by line and sang, and they said, oh, well, does this go there and that goes there? And okay, I think I get it. So then we read verse 2, and I asked them where they thought they should move, and they pointed the whole text together. And also there were some moments, if you've spent time with any of these kind of pointed texts in the English, you know that sometimes you move on the tradition is to move, on the last syllable, or uh, but that sometimes you have to move at an earlier spot to make the text stress make sense. So it was a really kind of interesting conversation about how you make those choices and why you make those choices, in order to make sure that you're really declaiming the text to the best of your ability. So we've had everything else written out since then, but I'm kind of excited to revisit this with our singers and to do the same thing again. Here you have an example of what we looked at already. This is what I call a psalm tone, but with modern notation conventions. So we have our 5-line treble clef staff that we're used to reading in most of our literature now. We have a reciting tone or a long note, and then we show the end of the end of the psalm tone, the moving pitches with the end of the phrase. It's all kind of written out. You can track it all together. There's some resources. This is from one of the Chabanel psalm composers, where they write out a pitch for each part of that reciting tone. So this is, the Lord's are the earth and its fullness. And they write all of that, the Lords are the earth, out with the pitch. I think the intention is for it to be helpful. It looks like it's something that's closer to what we're used to reading. So it might be helpful if you have singers who are just starting to kind of chant a psalm tone. It's interesting. I find our singers actually have a hard time with this notation. We have to remind them of what it would look like in the top notation. It's too much ink, too much information on the page. They do better with a little bit less information. They can really see clearly where the move is in the top example. So a great resource, a beautiful psalm setting, nonetheless. Um, the last type of repertoire option comes back to these Grail Psalm texts and this idea of being semi-metered. So after the Grail translations were published, a composer named Joseph Gelino made all of these psalm tones that fit with this kind of metered pattern of stressed syllables, and you fit the unstressed syllables into the rest of the measure. So the rhythm for something like this would be, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Which is different than the Lord is my light and my salvation. It's not spoken. It's kind of this hybrid in between example. There's another resource that does the same thing. It's available through OCP. It's called Spirit and Psalm. This uses the lectionary text, but kind of applies the same principle. So this is an excerpt from Psalm 23. And you could take this and sing it kind of like a chant tone. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I find that it's a lot of activity for a chant tone, but it's also certainly a possibility. We've also done this metered at our parish some. So you're fitting, you have your beat one and fitting everything within the measure. Lord is my, for example, into that one beat. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. It's a very lovely setting. I find that our students really struggle with this. They don't yet have skills to be able to say, okay, that's one beat per bar, and I can improvise a rhythm, and this is how it's going to fit. I sometimes will give one of these to like a seventh or eighth grader if I know that they're a really strong pianist or a strong string player with a string program and a band program. But by and large, it's the kind of thing that that we just don't have the time to settle into. And it's a different skill. The chanting and proclaiming is a skill, and this is a different skill. And it's important to me that we lay that other foundation first. The other considerations that are sort of global things that I keep in mind with the repertoire and then looking at what we're planning for school liturgies are consistency and then what I call user experience. When I first started here, I started in 2021. So there had not been much cantoring. It was sporadic. Singers were kind of coming out of not being able to sing. For a while. We had a mix of metrical psalmody and chant verses. Some of it was that metered chant, the Gelinos psalms that I just showed you. Very different styles of singing, very limited rehearsal time. And I found that students were struggling with the amount of text and the shifting between styles. I thought that the metrical settings would be useful to the students, but they were actually tricky because the music is never quite exactly the same. And sometimes the text fits in there in kind of a funny way to make it all work. And you really have to be quite a sophisticated singer to declaim it in a way that feels natural. So it felt like those moments were more exposed. The accompaniment is busier. So if you have a student whose voice is changing, that's really breathy or airy, it's hard to support them, but also stay out of the way. So I decided that we were going to lean into chanting and that I was going to do mostly one of the same composer. Here we use the settings that my colleague has written. We use them throughout the liturgical year on Sundays. We do use a handful of other chanted resources, but I wanted to kind of stick with a style. Then it looks the same each time. The psalm tones are reused throughout the cycle. This happens in the publications from OCP and GIA as well. And then, the ones that my colleague has written, the range is narrow, they're easy to transpose. They work really well for the age and kind of we have skilled singers, but if you walk in and your voice has changed and you only have the range of a fifth, it's nice to be able to say, oh, well, let's put it right here. That it feels good there today. Great. You're going to proclaim the psalm and to have that work. So I've really tried to lean into that one style. And I feel like that's really how we've been able to build that skill. And then if we want to move into a different style, they have a frame of reference, kind of a foundation established there. The other thing that I consider is kind of this user experience term that we hear a lot. Mine relates to literacy. I happen to share an office with our reading support coordinator, and when we have our lunchtime rehearsals, the kids are coming from all over the school. Sometimes there's like 80 of them. And she was like, "You're the only adult in the room. You need another adult. I'm coming to choir." But she knows all the kids. And so she would point out afterwards, well, so and so's lost. They can't even find the page. You know, when you did that thing where you tracked and just read verse one, that was so helpful for so and so. So she's really made me think a lot about what we're looking at on the page. Is there extra information? Can I eliminate it? I sometimes, some of the resources will give you a chanted tone and the Gelino tone, and it's all crammed on one page. So I cut out the one we're not doing. I blow it up. I white out the chord symbols. It's a little, that's a lot, but for a first, I don't do it for the eighth graders anymore. But when I'm introducing it to some of the fifth graders, if I know that extra information is going to be a barrier to them building that skill, then I try to take those sorts of things in mind, with the hope that they'll be reading fluently from any score by the time they leave us in eighth grade. So as we wrap up here and think about our considerations for how we take all of this into account for choosing repertoire for school masses, I come back to that phrase, fostering meditation on the Word of God. How do we do that in our pedagogy? How do we do that in our repertoire? So we're first looking at the text, looking at the lectionary text as much as we can. And if we're not using the lectionary text, why not, and how are we making that adjustment to best serve our community? The antiphon, that refrain, that's the music for congregation. Is it short? Is it memorable? Is it singable? No one's opening their hymnal to look at the psalm refrain. They need to be able to sing it by heart, by rote. And then lastly, the verses are the music for the cantors. I think I weigh this differently in our school situation than I might with a Sunday cantor. We presume in our parish, I guess your parish might be different, and that's fine, a certain level of competency for our adult cantors, a certain level of skill with chanting and reading. So we can use some of those things like the semi-metered chant. But I'm looking really heavily at what verses will our students be able to proclaim with best clarity and best diction and best singing. There's a list of a few resources that I've referenced here. I think we'll share them in the chat as well. There's some direct links. If you're not familiar, most of us know OCP and GIA and their work. Corpus Christi Watershed is a free resource. Composers have published their psalms for liturgical use at no charge. And there's a lot of really great options and resources there as well. The other side of the slide is a list of documents that give us some instruction about how to sing and our rubrics of the liturgy. My email's at the bottom. I obviously love to talk about this. So if there's a way that I can answer a question or be helpful or follow up on something we've discussed in this short time together, I'm happy to do so. We'll take a minute for questions, but before we do so, I thought that we could close with by praying together a little more of Psalm 27. We've looked at it in fragments here. So would you join me in praying? The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom should I fear? The Lord is my life's refuge. Of whom should I be afraid? When evildoers come at me to devour my flesh, these my enemies and foes themselves stumble and fall. Though an army encamp against me, my heart does not fear. Though war be waged against me, even then do I trust. One thing I ask of the Lord, this I seek, to dwell in the Lord's house all the days of my life, to gaze on the Lord's beauty, to visit his temple. For God will hide me in his shelter in time of trouble. He will conceal me in the cover of his tent and set me high upon a rock. Even now my head is held high above my enemies on every side. I will offer in his tent sacrifices with shouts of joy. I will sing and chant praise to the Lord. Thank you for being with us today. May God bless you and all of your work.
All right. Thank you so much, Laura. So we do have a question, and you might have answered it already. It was early on, but they were wondering if you write these for every weekly mass. This person uses the same verse chant for every weekly mass, and their junior high students create those melodies for themselves. So they were wondering how you do that.
I wind up using what we have available. I love the idea. I'm interested to know more about how you would be creating those. I've thought that would be a fun project as well. So we have by now we've mostly written or compiled psalm settings for most of our weekday masses. Occasionally, as we make our way through the cycle, there's a Friday or a feast where we don't have that. Sometimes there's a psalm. We might have verses from the Sunday Mass and then not an antiphon, and so we'll write an antiphon together. But
all right. And I don't see any other questions, but it's not too late. I'm going to review the end information and then I will check back one more time to see if we have any other questions. But first of all, thank you so much, Ms. Bogan, for speaking with us today. I want to extend our gratitude to those of you that are participating as well. Thank you for being here with us and taking time out of your busy schedule. Online attendees, please click on the link that I've provided to fill out the survey and join us next time for Spiritual Songs on May 14th at 4 p.m. The resources that Laura referenced, we will include those actually in our email out that includes the link to this webinar. So you'll be able to get that information then.
And really, one more time, just want to thank all of you for participating, completing the survey. And Miss Bogan, thank you for strengthening the work that our teachers are doing in their classrooms. And God bless, and everybody have a good day. Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, I lost you. Okay.
Thank you very
There you
much.
go. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I tried to include those links, but I wasn't able to. So
Oh,
they'll get
okay.
them they'll get it in the email that goes out.
Okay, that sounds great.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Laura.
Have a great day.
You too.